In the world of gaming, there are those that create and those that innovate. Games that set the bar and games that raise the bar higher. Adventures that are remembered for creating a genre, and others still that are credited with pushing a series further than it has ever gone before. But then there are those that, for one reason or another, are hardly remembered by anyone at all. Hi there, my name is Daniel, and I think Dragon Quest II is more creative than people realize. As work on the original Dragon Quest drew to a close, the team at Chunsoft knew they were onto something. They had successfully captured the scale and complexity of a role-playing adventure and presented it to players in a way that was simple to approach, yet difficult to complete. And while no one could have predicted just how much of a hit this series would become, especially in Japan, series director Yuji Horii was confident in the product he had created and was already at work on the sequel. And the goal for this next game was a simple idea that would prove incredibly challenging to realize: make the adventure bigger. The original Dragon Quest was already considered grand in its scope for the time, but this just wasn't enough for Horii and his team. Their next adventure needed to be larger, its world more vast, its story more substantial, and its characters more memorable. In fact, the scale of the project was increasing to such a point that Chunsoft was already running into significant issues with the game's balance, as well as its rapidly diminishing cartridge space. But in the end, they were rewarded with the well-earned fruit of their labor, as Dragon Quest II was released in January of 1987, less than a year after its predecessor. And like its predecessor, Dragon Quest II has seen a host of re-releases and ports over the years. For this reflection, I'll be playing the game's 2019 Switch port, a modified version of the 2014 mobile release, which also marked the debut of the game's updated title, Luminaries of the Legendary Line. I shared my personal thoughts about Dragon Quest Switch port in my previous reflection, and my opinion with this title is pretty much the same. Although I'm not the biggest fan of the graphical style chosen for this release, I think it's the simplest way to enjoy the game today, especially for Western gamers like myself. First things first, we've got ourselves a cutscene! The original Dragon Quest had pushed video game storytelling forward by providing a solid amount of in-game exposition, allowing the game's story to be enjoyed apart from reading the instruction manual. And as we can see here, the sequel is not slowing the pace in this regard at all. From the very get-go, we're given a cinematic telling of the game's tragic backstory that sets the stage for this entry's more involved narrative approach. Set 100 years after the previous game, the evil wizard Hargon, or Hargan, whatever, there's no voice acting, who knows, attacks Moonbrook Castle and razes it to the ground. The first of many acts of destruction in his mission to summon the demon Malroth to destroy the world. Only a single soldier escapes the slaughter and is able to flee to the kingdom of Maidenhall, where he's able to inform the king of the attack on the neighboring kingdom before dying at his feet. Your character, who, hot take alert, is the lamest looking hero in the series. I mean, Goggles? Are you kidding me? Sorry, don't want to step on any toes if you love this guy. But just look at the heroes for 1 and 3 and tell me this one isn't lame. Anyway, you're the king's son and a descendant of the legendary hero Erdrick, as well as the hero from the first game. With the blood of legends flowing through your veins, you're tasked with tracking down your two cousins and journeying across the land to defeat Hargon and save the world from darkness. All in all, pretty standard for a hero's journey in a fantasy world, but breaking that particular mold has never really been the highest priority for the Dragon Quest series as a whole. The real star of the show here is the presentation. And while we're essentially repeating our quest to gather sacred relics in order to defeat a pretty generic bad guy, the increased emphasis on visual storytelling and improved pacing go a long way towards setting the game's story apart. But the narrative wasn't the only thing improved upon in this sequel. The game's world was also enlarged exponentially. And to really drive this home, the Kingdom of Alefgard, which comprises the entirety of Dragon Quest's playable area, occupies only a fraction of Dragon Quest II's world of Torland. Of course, the scale here is a little arbitrary, as there's no way the team could have increased the size of the game's playable area by that much. In reality, the pixel count of Dragon Quest II's world map is only 4 times larger than that of Dragon Quest, as Alefgard has been shrunk down and simplified considerably this time around. But even if it primarily serves a narrative purpose, this perspective on the first game's landmass makes a powerful statement about the scope of this adventure. But as we can even see with modern day games, simply enlarging a game's playable area doesn't always equal a better experience for the player. In fact, a bigger world can often present more potential issues for a developer, as they're essentially just increasing the amount of space they need to fill with meaningful content. More space, more work. Horii's team knew this, which is why the first game's entirely hands-off approach to progression just simply wouldn't fly here. In the original Dragon Quest, you're essentially let loose in this massive explorable world without much guidance, and the only two ways of discerning the path forward were by cryptic hints from townsfolk and getting absolutely bodied by overleveled monsters when you venture into certain areas. Yep, probably shouldn't go there yet. And this approach worked for the original scope. But imagine being dropped into the middle of this map with the same set of expectations placed upon you. The word daunting comes to mind. Yeah, the silent guiding hand of the developer needed to be more finely tuned this time around, which is why Dragon Quest II saw the incorporation of a 2-act narrative structure, a tried and true method of progression that has become pretty commonplace in game development. The first act is incredibly straightforward and focuses on teaching the game's core mechanics while introducing the cast of playable characters. We'll call this the preparation phase, as its purpose is to slowly introduce the player to gameplay elements one at a time and equip them for success in the latter half of their adventure. Unlike the first hours of the previous game, this section of Dragon Quest II offers little to no exploration or choice on where to progress to next. In fact, the critical path in this initial phase can be traced rather simply along this snake-like continent, with steadily increasing enemy levels along the way and not much reason to return to previous areas. Now, in the age of open-world adventures, the term linear has almost become a dirty word among gamers, as the perception seems to be that less choice tends to allow less room for interesting experiences. But I actually think there are quite a few benefits to reining in the player's options at times, one of which being a far simpler and less overwhelming means of easing the player into an experience, which is the approach Dragon Quest II takes in this first half. But all of that changes when this happens. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention, as another means of expanding upon the original game, the developers give you a boat this time around. And just like that, the entire world map opens up in an instant, signaling the beginning of what we'll call the exploration phase. The sense of freedom and possibility at your fingertips here is truly magical, but it honestly feels kind of overwhelming too, which is why I'm so glad I spent the game's first few hours on a more straightforward tour of the game's mainland. Not only am I more familiar with the game's systems than I would be if I was given the boat right off the bat, but my option of new areas to explore are fewer as well. It may feel overwhelming, but it's manageable. My party and I have already overcome so much in our adventure, which allows me to feel truly inspired by this sudden increase in expectation. This second half doesn't come without its issues though. Upon receiving the boat, you're tasked with collecting 6 sigils from around the world of Torland in order to access the game's final area, Rindarak. And unlike the first phase, you're given almost no guidance on where these sigils are or what order you should collect them in. The only clue you really have is your world map, where you can see the areas you haven't explored yet. And believe me, exploration is my jam. I absolutely love discovering new locations and uncovering their secrets. But my excitement at the prospect of exploration was eventually replaced by exhaustion and even boredom, as I very slowly combed each settlement and location for clues as to where I should go next. The freedom of this second phase was awesome. I just think the pacing needs some refining that would thankfully come in the series' later titles. I didn't have to walk this grueling road alone though, because Dragon Quest II gave me a party. Now I know this doesn't seem like a big deal since the party is like elementary RPG design at this point. But at the time, this was actually a first for the series. The original Dragon Quest was a solo adventure, and as a result, combat and equipment pretty much came down to one thing: damage output. And there really weren't many interesting strategic choices to be made in combat. But this time, our hero is joined by his 2 cousins, the Prince of Cannock and the Princess of Moonbrook. Now, these 2 characters are given names depending on how you name your hero, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm just going to refer to them using the names they were given in my save file. This is Cain, and this is Elaine. Cain, Elaine. Cool? Cool. Anyway, as one might expect, the addition of 2 unique playable characters to the field of battle creates more opportunity for strategy than in the previous game. I can't emphasize enough how good it feels to have combat options in this adventure, as it allows for more skillful play and protects the combat, which is such a huge part of the game, from getting stale too quickly. Strategically using buffs and debuffs to gain the upper hand on an enemy before bringing down the hammer has become one of my favorite aspects of RPG combat over the years, and it's really fun to see the potential come so boldly out of the gate here. And speaking of your party, let's talk about utility. Now, of course, when it comes to strategizing, the concept of usefulness is pretty subjective. Different approaches are useful in different situations, so it's usually not helpful to try and objectively gauge the quality of individual party members. But I really just couldn't help thinking during my time with the game that not all of my companions were made equal. Cain and Elaine have access to a ton of spells, and that's great. With spells like Whoosh and Sizzle, They can clear out entire hordes of enemies in a single turn at times. But then you've got your main character, who has no magical abilities and relies entirely on single target attacks. Now, this archetype isn't new. The Knight class is the oldest trope in the RPG genre. But when there's only 3 characters total, and 2 of them have access to a whole host of options, it leaves the third character feeling a little lame by comparison. Sorry dude, that's like the 3rd time I've called you lame in this video. You get a bad rap, you really do. But let's not forget the game we're talking about here. Do me a favor and look up any review of Dragon Quest II. Go ahead, pause the video if you want. I'll be here when you get back. Alright, you ready? Every single person who's played and reviewed this game has the same thing to say about it. It is freaking hard. And not just, oh, that really made me sit up and pay attention hard. No, like, this game made me rage quit and I didn't return to it for a couple months hard. Now, we've already covered the game's pacing issues, but in the end, that's fine with me. Getting lost and frustrated isn't fun, no, but I'd like to think I'm pretty resilient. And unless the rest of the game just isn't worth it, this alone isn't a deal breaker for me. But it's the combat. It's getting ambushed by a horde of overleveled enemies when you're neck deep in uncharted territory. It's the ridiculous party-wiping spells that seem to be handed out to your foes way too early in a game. And don't get me wrong, I don't think difficult combat is the root issue here. Plenty of the best games out there make you earn your victories, and they're better for it. But this is just poor balance. In fact, the game's imbalanced combat is one of its most notorious issues. Hori's team was overwhelmed with the ballooning scope of their upcoming title, and its release date was coming up fast. So, like many other games over the years, Dragon Quest II suffered from some rushed, haphazard decisions from the developers. They had no framework for how to balance and pace such a large adventure, so while they worked tirelessly to ensure that no single enemy would unfairly outlevel the player, they unfortunately didn't account for combat scenarios with multiple enemies, which is to say, pretty much every encounter in the game. So, you're regularly faced with hordes of enemies, each individually capable of matching your team's strength on their own. And they attack. And they keep on attacking. And you die. Oh, and when you die for the 30th time, you have to cough up half your cash, which admittedly isn't new. The first game famously did this instead of a checkpoint system, and having a significant consequence for death like this really does raise the stakes. But what is new is this little coffin guy. Hi, coffin guy. These fun friends will follow you around when your actual friends fall in combat, because, well, they're dead. And to make them undead, you have to pay one of these financially trustworthy priests, who then sound the pipe organ and bring them back to the land of the living. And the amounts they charge get pretty ridiculous as your levels get higher. So you wake up with half your lunch money taken, and you're asked to use the rest of it just to bring your party back as well. Great. I know I've just spent a hot minute venting my feelings about the balance, pacing, and all sorts of other fun stuff. But honestly, as I've stepped back from my experience a bit, I find that I'm incredibly grateful for this underappreciated gem. Now let me be clear, I think this game is incredibly flawed in some key areas, but I also don't think it gets enough credit for the bold steps and innovations it brought to the Dragon Quest series, as well as the RPG genre at large. Dragon Quest II expanded the vision for what a console RPG could be, but because it was pretty much immediately outclassed by the unanimously favored Dragon Quest III and Final Fantasy, it really doesn't get the recognition it truly deserves. Epic multi-phase adventures? Dragon Quest II. Intercontinental travel and exploration? Also Dragon Quest II. And how about the mainstream implementation of the party system? This game showed the world that it could be done. And although it's far from perfect, this grand sequel has more than earned its place in the ranks of gaming history, at least in my book. Out of the 3 Dragon Quest games available on the Switch at this point, I would honestly recommend this one the least, but regardless, I still think it deserves to be celebrated. And if we're celebrating things, can we just talk about the game's music? I didn't go into much detail when talking about the first game, but Koichi Sugiyama's work on these symphonic scores is just beautiful. Dragon Quest's art and sound design have always been some of the largest elements that set it apart. And if I'm being honest, too, this game, the easily forgotten one, has some of my favorite tracks in the whole series. Look, I don't even care if you never play this game. Look up Traveling with Friends from the OST, or even better, Endless World from the live symphonic suite, and tell me there isn't beauty and hope in the world. Tears, literal tears at points, in a game featuring this guy. Man, I'm sorry, I don't know what my deal is with him. Goggles, stupid. Anyway, it's about time we wrap this up, and as we do, I want to look toward the horizon. It's kind of crazy to think ahead and wonder what kind of crazy adventures may lie in my future. But like Yuji Horii and his team, I can be confident that some of the steps I take will be more successful than others. Some may be straight up mistakes, while others might just require me to reel in my excitement a bit. But if I've learned anything from this game, it's that dreaming big is never a bad thing. I may not reach all of my goals in my life, and I think about that a lot even with this channel. But if I never dream, I'll never move. And I've been given this life to move with purpose. So whatever your dreams in life may be, I want to invite you to embrace each step of this journey with me in every mistake and success. Thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you thought in the comments below, and if you want to see more like it, subscribe so you won't miss a single upload. Next time, we're giving the reins to Squaresoft with the legendary Final Fantasy, so hit that notification bell so you know when it's live. See you guys next time.